I work for a major communications company in Detroit. Not the outskirts like in the city. Downtown and all around, including the shittiest of the shitty areas. As you can imagine, some of the things I see on a daily basis are mind-blowing. Last week I had a job on the east side. My co-workers always complain about the east side because of how sketchy it is. Me, though, I enjoy it. Adds some excitement to the day. I pulled up to the job site. The house was one of 3 on the whole block and was half boarded up. I figured it was one of those renovation homes that someone bought and was fixing up. I was wrong. The guy opens the door and invites me in. I hesitated, trying to glance inside first. I always try to make sure I'm not walking into my deathbed. Once inside, I immediately felt uneasy. Instant goosebumps and creepy vibes. There was no furniture except for a coffee table, which had 3 shotguns laying on it. The guy told me not to be alarmed and that he was just getting ready to clean those today. I've seen things like this before, so I continued going over his job order to get a game plan set up for what I was there to do, which was install his security system. I went to the basement to check a few things out, and I could tell halfway down the stairs something wasn't right. The floor was half flooded. There were a few mops and buckets I could see, along with a huge floor freezer on the back wall. All this was accompanied by one of the most horrid smells I've ever smelt in my life. I turned around and went back to the living room where the guy was. I told him I had to go check a few things outside in the backyard, and I'd be back in a few minutes. Being a worker that goes inside of homes, we are kind of in a gray area when it comes to reporting suspicious things. We have meetings with state police and the FBI every year about what we should and shouldn't report. I called my manager once outside and told him the situation. I also noticed that the house was stealing power, which is a big red flag for us. He said if I felt unsafe to leave the area. So I went back to the door and informed the guy that I had to run back to the shop to get some equipment. Once I got down the street, I called my dispatchers and had them cancel the job. I told them that they could call the customer and inform him if they wanted, but I wasn't going back. A week or so went by, and one morning I woke up and turned on the news while I was getting ready for work. A breaking news story comes on. A shooting on the east side leads to the discovery of 2 bodies inside a freezer in someone's basement. My heart almost stopped. They showed the house, and sure as shit, it was the same house I was at. They found one man dead in the living room from a gunshot wound, which led to the discovery in the basement. I'm not sure if it was a murder or he took his own life, but I knew something was wrong there. I made it a point to go drive by that house to verify it was the same house I was at. The house was caution taped off, and there were cops all over the block. I was shook. I ended up calling off the rest of that day and just chilling at home, thinking about every possibility that could have happened had I stayed there and not canceled that job. This happened last summer right after a storm hit on a Thursday night. The entire block plunged into darkness. Lightning flashed, illuminating the houses on my street. The power stayed out for hours, and by morning, a restoration crew was dispatched to fix the lines. I saw them working in their heavy coats and hard hats as they went from house to house, resetting meters and switching on power. Most of the houses lit up one by one, but my neighbor Mike's house, right next door, stayed dark. He was away on a business trip, and I figured the crew had just missed him. That evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed something odd. A figure moved across Mike's yard, a dark silhouette barely visible in the dim light from the street lamp. At first, I assumed it was someone from the restoration crew coming back to fix his power, but it was late, and they usually didn't work after dark. I watched as the man disappeared around the side of Mike's house, and I figured it was probably nothing. The next morning, there was a strange stillness around the neighborhood. I didn't see Mike's car in the driveway, which was unusual, but I assumed he was still out of town. However, as the day wore on, a sense of dread began to creep in. My mind drifted back to the shadow I'd seen by Mike's house the night before. By midday, the police were there, and yellow tape was stretched across Mike's yard. The neighbors were saying that Mike had come home early and walked in on a worker who'd left his power off intentionally as a cover to break in. Mike had walked into his own house, only to find himself facing a violent stranger. Apparently, the confrontation had escalated quickly, and in the struggle, the intruder overpowered Mike, killed him, and hid his body in the closet. My skin crawled thinking about it. A worker, someone the power company had hired to help us, had used the outage as an opportunity to break into my neighbor's home. He was out on probation, but they'd given him a chance by giving him a job. To my knowledge, he's still on the run. The police presence lingered for days, combing through the house and questioning everyone. As the investigation went on, the details came to light, and they were grim. I found myself glancing over my shoulder whenever I walked down the hallway or closed my front door. Then, a few nights later, I woke up in the middle of the night. At first, I wasn't sure why, but a heavy, oppressive feeling settled over me. The room was dark. I lay there, straining to listen, and in the silence, I thought I heard something. An almost unmistakable sound, like a door closing softly. I stayed still, my heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was nothing, that it was just my mind playing tricks after all the recent events. But then I felt an odd chill, a draft that shouldn't have been there. I forced myself to get up, slowly creeping down the hallway. As I passed the guest room, something made me stop. I could feel the cold seeping through the door. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and found the window wide open, curtains fluttering. My heart dropped. I shut the window quickly, securing the lock, and told myself it was just an oversight. Maybe I'd left it open earlier. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something. A small, almost invisible mark in the carpet near the closet. A faint, muddy footprint, fresh enough to suggest it hadn't been there long. I called the police to be safe. Of course, they found nothing. They said they did find Mike's car just south of the state border, suggesting their fugitive was now across state lines. They said maybe he had been inside my house first and was scared off, which could explain the footprint. It was a regular Tuesday morning when I heard a knock on my door. Through the peephole, I saw a man wearing a hard hat and a safety vest, clipboard in hand. He looked official enough. When I cracked the door, he introduced himself as a utility worker from the local power company. Said they were relocating meters in my neighborhood and he needed to come inside to inspect mine. He even flashed his ID. It looked legit, so I stepped aside and let him in. The man was polite but quiet, barely making eye contact. He went straight to my basement, muttering something about needing to check connections and wiring. I went back to the kitchen, trying to ignore the unease creeping over me as I heard him moving around below. He'd just caught me off guard, I told myself. The noises in the basement dragged on for about 45 minutes, and I found myself checking the clock. Finally, he emerged from the basement, thanked me with a nod, and left without another word. He got into a plain, unmarked truck parked in my driveway, pulled out slowly, and drove off. I watched through the window, expecting to see him pull up at one of my neighbor's houses, but he didn't. The truck just disappeared down the street. The whole encounter felt off. But he had the ID, the uniform. It seemed legit enough. I brushed it off and went on with my day, though a small, nagging doubt lingered. Days passed, and I all but forgot about the strange visit, until I got a text from an unknown number late one night. Half asleep, I squinted at my phone, expecting spam. But when I opened the message, my stomach dropped. There, in horrifying clarity, were pictures of me, taken inside my own home. One showed me watching TV in my living room. Another showed me getting ready for bed, brushing my hair in front of the bathroom mirror. They were all recent. My hands started shaking, and I broke into a cold sweat. I scrambled to lock every door and window in the house, my mind racing back to that utility worker. The thought that he could have placed hidden cameras while he was working crept into my mind, each second making it feel more certain. I dialed the police immediately, my voice shaking as I explained everything. Within minutes, officers were at my door, and I led them from room to room, pointing out any place I thought he could have hidden something. It didn't take them long to find the cameras, tiny, inconspicuous devices tucked into places I'd never think to check. They were in the living room, the kitchen, even the bathroom. The realization hit like a sledgehammer. For days, he'd been watching me in my own home, through his own devices, recording everything without me knowing. The police traced the cameras back to him. He'd done this before, they said, targeting people who lived alone. They assured me he'd been arrested, that he wouldn't be coming back. For a few days, I felt relieved, though I still couldn't shake it. I'd unplugged the devices and covered any electronic in my house that had a lens. I barely slept, replaying every moment in my mind, hoping it was finally over. One night, as I was starting to believe I could put it all behind me, I got another message from that same unknown number. My heart skipped as I opened it, only to find a single picture. It was a recent photo of me, taken through my bedroom window, from outside. The police came out, but of course, nothing or nobody was found.